Hello and welcome to the Not Quite Otaku Anime Podcast. I'm Joe,
And I'm Brandon.
and this is episode 8, by the way.
I'm
Thought
glad
I
someone's
just,
keeping count because I
yeah,
am
I know.
not.
I had to go back and look. Too bad it's like counting to 10 is going to be hard. Uh, I
Hey,
also
we'll
seemingly,
hit double digits soon here.
yeah, we're almost there. I also almost forgot my name. It felt like at the beginning. It's like I've noticed every time I do the intro, it's like I have to like think about my name for a minute, and I don't know why.
Just make sure you don't mess it up.
Yeah, it's hard. 3 letters. Um, so cool. So today we are going to be talking about. So in honor of Sephiroth joining Final Fantasy already, in honor
Joining
of
Smash
Sephiroth
Brothers.
joining Super Smash Brothers Ultimate. So as of the time of recording this, it was what, like a week ago. He was revealed
I actually think
slash.
officially released today. Am
Oh
I
yeah,
wrong?
he is. Oh no, you're right. Oh,
We're
this is
the
so timely that we
22nd
recorded this.
Yeah.
Yes. So yeah. So it was like it was just over a week ago he was revealed, because that's what gave us the idea to watch this. And then yeah, so today is the official reveal, or official release. So I unlocked him early, as did you, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, we did the Sephiroth challenge. Some of us had an easier time than others.
Apparently, it was a little hard for one of us.
Yeah, we won't name names. Me. But but so yeah, so we both got a chance to play as him. So kind of unrelated. We've talked about this probably a little bit, but what do you? It's been a few days since we've discussed Sephiroth and Smash. What do you think of him? Just
Oh, I
curious.
think he's a fun character. You know, I wasn't particularly excited when it was announced, mostly because to be honest, I'm not the biggest Final Fantasy VII fan, and I thought it would be more interesting to get a character from a new IP. But at the same time, I think he's a very well designed character. He's a lot of fun to play. I like that he's slow and kind of plotting because, you know, you'd think another sword fighter, they're probably going to play similar to the rest of them. They often do. And I feel like it was unique enough that brought a good wrinkle. As a well designed character.
Yeah, I was super excited at the reveal. I think when the first note of One Winged Angel hit, I was really excited about it. Which this kind of can lead into a discussion about Final Fantasy VII for us, and why we're discussing Advent Children. Sort of our, not sort of, it is our video game cross anime thing. We did a discussion earlier about Resident Evil, and I think it's just something that we're interested. Two of our interests colliding happens often. So I was super excited about the reveal. I didn't see it coming, and I was, I agree with you in the sense that, like, yeah, it would have been cool to get another representative from another series. Like, it's always fun to see someone come from some other like corner. But I guess like the thing about Sephiroth was that I don't know why, like, and I think a lot of people didn't think of him as coming. Like, it was just like, oh well, we got Cloud and that's it.
Yeah, I think the assumption was like, oh, you got your one Final Fantasy character. You're not going to get more. Like, it just
You're not gonna get
never
two,
crossed anyone's mind, really. I think.
Right. There was the whole thing too that like Cloud was one of the last characters that they could get to guarantee to be an ultimate. It was like Square was dragging their feet. So but yeah, I was super excited, and I agree. I think he's a really cool, fun character. Like, again, I know everyone like dumped on, oh, it's an anime swordsman and blah blah blah, but he's got so many unique moves and skills, and like just using his sword is not like playing as a 900th Fire Emblem character. So
Yeah.
you're getting, you're getting something unique out of it, even though it is a sword fighter. But which leads us to, I think it's a good segue, is so talking about, why, I brought up the idea of let's watch Advent Children. So Final Fantasy VII obviously is an iconic video game. It's...
Yeah, it's fair to say it's one of the most recognizable RPGs. And I would say among people that are older, definitely one of the most recognizable games. I don't know. I can't speak for like younger generations if people who really got into video games in like the late 2000s or something, maybe it's not as important to them. But
I think though it's like a defining game of the PlayStation era and of that era in general. I mean, I remember even as a kid where I was a Nintendo owner, so I didn't have PlayStation, but I remember everyone, people who did like or one friend like saying like, "Oh, Final Fantasy VII is better than Ocarina of Time," and I'd be like, "No," because I just loved Ocarina of Time, not having any idea what Final Fantasy VII was really like, and also it's a terrible comparison of games.
Yeah,
Like,
as you get older, you realize like comparing those two games is kind of stupid because they're just so
yeah,
different that like
yeah, it's
you
like
can't really.
two
It's like
different genres.
yeah, yeah, it just doesn't really play.
Um, but they were, they were both like the defining two of the defining games of each of their consoles, right? So it's like it's definitely a game, and then obviously you've had Advent Children. There have been spin-offs to varying degrees of success, and then you have the Final Fantasy VII remake coming out recently. So it clearly still has a draw and attraction, and any
Yeah, the industry certainly hasn't forgot about it, or I guess
no.
Square certainly hasn't forgot about it. To be more specific,
No. Um, so I guess like let's talk about it because as I was thinking about this episode too, I was thinking I don't really necessarily. I mean, I know we've talked about it a little bit, but like, what is your? I think you might know more about me than I know about you, but like, what is your experience with Final Fantasy VII? Because I actually wasn't sure like when was the first time you approached it.
Yeah, so I played. I guess we go through like kind of history of Final Fantasy for me real quick,
Sure.
because I know a lot of people. I think a lot of people's entry was with Seven, and that plays a big part into how they feel about it. At least that's my opinion on it. I played Final Fantasy VIII first, and this was on the original PlayStation. Of my friend of mine who lived down the street owned it, and I would go over to his house and we just play it for hours and hours and hours. So like I played through the entirety of Final Fantasy VIII in the 90s, and then I played 9, probably about half of it under the same circumstances. Then I got a PS2 and I played 10, and then I played 10-2, and then probably in the mid 2000s, probably around like 2005 to 2007 range, is when I actually played Final Fantasy VII. And I probably played some of the earlier games within that time frame as well before then. But in terms of the more modern ones, Final Fantasy VII was basically the last one I played. And it's been a long time since I've played it because I have not ever gone to revisit it. So it's probably been about 15 years since I played the game, and I enjoyed it, but I didn't see what everyone else saw in it. I guess like I thought it was a good Final Fantasy game, but like a lot of Final Fantasy games are good, and I didn't think it stood out to me personally. So I don't know. What about you? What's your experience?
Well, I think like to share, I think you kind of probably know, but for anyone listening, obviously they don't know. So as I was listening and thinking about it, like first Final Fantasy game, to be honest, would have been Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles on the GameCube, which is insane to say, but because because like I had a Super Nintendo growing up, but I didn't know like what everything was. I think one of the biggest things is talking to one of our friends about it is like he's like, "Well, you had a Super Nintendo. How'd you not play all those RPGs?" And I'm like, when I was 8, I had no idea what Chrono Trigger was when I saw it in KB Toys.
And
Like,
I guess to interrupt you real quick, if we're counting spin-offs, Final Fantasy Mystic Quest.
I would say you had
was
Mystic Quest because you
but
let me borrow it.
Yeah, but that's not like that's not a Final Fantasy game. I don't know. I don't count that.
Yeah, I also think I have your copy of Mystic Quest.
You
I think
very
I do.
well could.
I have a copy of it. Never played it actually. Fun fact. So, yeah. So for me, it was like, again, like, I mean, because I can remember being a kid, going to the toy store, and like, I remember seeing the box for Super Metroid and have, as an example of a game, having no idea that like it is now one of the most, revered Super Nintendo games. And sure, I got to play it later, but my first, I guess, Metroid experience was Metroid Prime and Metroid Fusion were like the first two. So things like that, so there's just like a lot of like ways it's, people be like, oh, it's like depending on how old you were. I didn't know Final Fantasy VI existed and that it was considered, for a lot of people, one of the best Final Fantasy games. So yeah, I missed it. And then obviously not growing up with, or not getting any type of PlayStation until recently, getting PS4. I didn't play any of them except for Crystal Chronicles on GameCube, which does not count in any way, in my opinion. So, yeah, my first experience really was like I played a little bit of 6. I'm trying to think of when they all came out, and I think it was the SNES Classic came up first. And I remember I played a little bit of 6, and then it just was like, I liked it, and I just kind of, I don't know, got busy or whatever. But 7 was, so then they when they did the whole announcement on Switch of like all these Final Fantasy games are coming, uh I finally got to play 7 and I was super excited about it because I was like, yeah, I've heard about this game forever. And so that was the first one I played. And it's interesting you say like you didn't really see what people saw in it. And I remember thinking going into it, okay, I'm approaching this game that was from, what was it, 1995, 6, 7, I can't remember off the top of my head,
Yeah,
but
I
from
can't
the mid
either.
90s. Um, I'm approaching this game for the first time, and like with a lot of older games, when you go back to it and the modern day and never had an attachment to it as a kid or anything, the game usually you really see its flaws a lot more. Um, and while yeah, it's definitely a traditional RPG and it has a lot of the same tropes and it's a little more basic than maybe some of the stuff you'd have today, I was super into it. And I don't know if that is because, or I think it might partly be because like I had this expectation that this is like a really great game and these great characters, and so even though I never played it, like I knew who Cloud was, I knew who certain things were. So um I'll be honest, like it's probably in my top 10 games. Like I really really loved playing it. I really enjoyed the time I played it. There's something about hearing the songs and the soundtrack that always make me feel good and bring me back to that, just floating around the airship. And um so for me, it's interesting that I think at least that I came to it so late, but I still feel like I have a really strong attachment to it, like a lot of people who did, having had played it on the original PlayStation. So
Yeah, and that is interesting because I like usually in my experience, so like Super Metroid's a good example that I didn't play Super Metroid till a few years ago for the first time because I also like I had a Super Nintendo, but I had no idea what Super Metroid is, and I
mhm.
only ever owned about 5 games for my Super Nintendo, like just kind of how it was back then.
Yeah,
So of course that wasn't a game I ever played because I was a kid. I didn't have paths of information telling me this is a good game. Like, basically bought
yeah,
things that either a friend owned or the box was cool, like, or it said Mario or Zelda on it. Like
yeah, exactly.
that was pretty much the limits. So, but generally, when I've gone back and played those, kind of iconic of the time games, I'm usually disappointed in them. That like I can understand with Super Metroid. I can understand why at the time it was kind of a groundbreaking game, but like people have done the Metroid formula way better now. So it
Mhm.
has a
Even
lot of
Metroid
gaps
has
in
done.
gameplay. Yeah, even
Yeah,
Metroid has done it. And then you look at a game like I will always stand like Hollow Knight is
yeah,
the best Metroid game ever made, of that genre. And
yeah.
like
Metroidvania kind of.
Super Metroid doesn't hold a candle to it in my opinion. And it's not just
No,
because it looks prettier. Like there are massive gameplay improvements that have happened and game design improvements that have happened over 20 years of making video games, which is what is to be expected. That's what you hope.
hmm yeah. And nowadays, it's interesting when you get like an RPG that harkens back to the classic days of RPGs. Usually, everyone says, "Well, this is really basic and this is really whatever," and it's kind of like uninteresting, but it feels derivative. So then, yeah, of course, it's going to be because you don't have the stature of characters like Cloud and Tifa and Barrett and everyone. Sephiroth is your villain. So yeah, it's interesting. It's an interesting like thing looking back at it. But I was definitely genuinely shocked like how much I got into the game and how much I really enjoyed it and like feel that connection to it. Even though my first time playing it was maybe 2 years ago, I think, or something like that.
Yeah,
So
that sounds about right. And I mean, to your credit, you played through that game and finished it in a short amount of time, which is very uncommon for you.
yeah,
So I
I
can that's how I could gauge that. Oh, you really like this game.
it
You're
didn't
making
take me 2 years to beat it. It's
Yeah,
like,
you made a concerted effort
or,
to get through it.
yeah, I spent a lot of nights just like playing through. Yeah, it was great. I loved it. So that brings us to Advent Children, and I guess like want to talk to you. We can talk about it just as a movie in terms of like what we thought of it and if we enjoyed it, because I think that's also an interesting thing. Like looking at it from, I remember when it came out, and I remember someone who was like a big fan of Final Fantasy and like really liked that movie. One of our friends in high school, he liked Final Fantasy a lot, and I remember he was really into Advent Children when it came out, and I didn't really know anything about it. And I think one of our other friends liked it too. But basically, it's interesting to think about like how this movie stands for people in terms of Final Fantasy, because like it's an extension, it's a continuation of it, and
Yeah, and I think it's the thing that was most clear to me after watching this movie is like this movie was made for people who played and liked Final Fantasy VII. I couldn't imagine just watching this movie and caring about any of the characters, and there would be so many holes in plot and everything that's
oh
because
my
I
god,
mean
yeah.
it's already a disjointed movie, like even with all the background information. Granted, it's been a long time for me, so I still had quite a few gaps as well, but like there's it's not well written in my opinion. Like it's written with the expectation that not only do you know about Final Fantasy the game, but like you are familiar with the deeper lore as well, which is really strange to me.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. That like, if you have no knowledge of Final Fantasy VII, like, you're not gonna like this movie, or or at most you'll be like, this was entertaining at points. But, um, like, I don't think you had to know. I mean, I think if you, and granted, like I said, I played the game more recently, so I think if you just have played the game and have some familiarity, and I know there's a lot of people out there who replay it and have beaten it 1,000 times, so they're the people. This is for them. This movie, because
Yes.
there is a lot of the lore, um, and like seeing the characters and getting the gist of things. I think like what I enjoyed about this movie is how it did kind of develop and bring to life the characters, because at the time with the PlayStation you couldn't have them be I mean, you look at the graphics of what it was there, and there's no voice acting, and there's all these things that were
Yeah, and
missing.
they're
And
polygons, and
they're
it's
polygons, yeah.
yeah.
And this was like a total CG movie, which still looks pretty good. I mean, like, which is, I mean, expected for Final Fantasy. They always are breaking the bank on the graphics.
For sure, but I was surprised that for a 15-year-old CG movie, I would agree the character models, like character design in general, was probably the strongest part of the movie, with the exception of Barrett. I thought he looked not how I would have imagined him to look
Yeah,
based off of
Barrett with the Barrett with
with
like the fishnet shirt thing was weird. Yeah,
yeah,
it
and
was
the
like,
white jacket, and even like his head and face didn't seem right, and like maybe it's just how I imagined him, but like I
no,
based off
he
of
definitely looks
his
better in
model,
remake than he
but
does in.
yeah, I think Final Fantasy VII Remake captured his essence way better than this movie did. But outside of that, I
Yeah,
thought the character designs were all solid.
yeah, I agree. I mean, like everyone else, Cloud, Tifa, Sephiroth, Aerith, everyone, Red 13. I mean, even like Kate Sith was in there for a hot second.
Yeah,
Um,
for
and
very
stuff like that.
very brief moments,
Yeah, there's some moments, and
and that goes along with the whole like
everyone
this was
else.
made for Final Fantasy VII fans. Like they don't even name Red 13 or Kate Sith or like
Yeah,
give them any
or
characterization. They're just like, look, they're here, and like that would do nothing for you if you've never played the game.
yeah, no, there's there's a lot of missing pieces there, but um, yeah, one of the things I will say, so it looks really good. That I will say is one of the strengths. But like I said, what I was gonna say is I do like that it seemed to like kind of just create a more depth to the characters, like even with like the Turks, like Reno and stuff, like those guys, they like created some humor in it, and it's like a thing that I guess I feel like I never got playing the game.
Yeah, and those would fall under the characters that I don't remember at all from the game. Like I could tell that I was supposed to know what that character was like, but like it's just been so long, and that character from the game has just fallen out of my memory. So it was
Okay.
those guys, and it was the new Shinra president, that I don't remember their stories or characters in the game at all.
Oh yeah, so the one was like the son
Yeah, the son.
who
Yeah,
takes over,
yeah,
whatever that. But yeah, so I think like what I enjoyed was sort of the added depth to it. I mean, in terms of the story, the gist of it is there's so a meteor crashed, which like caused this illness coming from the life stream. Sephiroth is kind of he's the cause of it, like
So I
causing this
think
thing called
how they
geostigma.
try to justify it is like Sephiroth became one with the life stream. So like Sephiroth
Yes.
existed within the life stream. So he wasn't actually dead. He was without body, but his essence is now a part of the life stream.
And so there's these other like three other guys who, from what I understood, are created from Mother. They're trying to like kind of all the same idea of
Yeah, that was the another part that wasn't clear to me, and that's probably just another part of being so removed from the game. Of like, are they basically supposed to be like failed versions of Sephiroth, or like?
yeah. I think what
I
I
didn't quite
gathered
grasp
from
it.
it, and I'm trying to think because we did watch this a week ago, so even now it's amazing how like your memory fades. It's like what was that? Is that they are sort of the same like soldier and all that stuff, so they are all the same, but they I guess are trying to like bring back Sephiroth so then they can like
Yeah, so that's their goal is to find the remnants of Genova, I believe.
yeah Genova, yeah, which
find
is
the
like
remnants of
their
Genova
mother.
with which they will be able to revive Sephiroth.
Yes, so they're there and they're causing problems, and there's the one boy, so there's like Marlene, the one girl, and then there's this boy Denzel, which I love. His name is Denzel, like one of the
Yeah.
best parts. Like screams mid 2000s to me. Like
Yeah. And it's an interesting. So like I watched it subbed. I believe you did too.
yeah, we both did. Yeah,
And that I can't remember exactly what the Japanese name is, but
it
I
was
would not
like
have picked Denzel as the translation of it.
yeah, it was like Denzeru, I think was like how they said
Yeah.
it. So like, which makes sense, but like in your heads, like you still also aren't thinking Denzel, and then like you read it and you're like, oh, okay. Like it was like interesting name choice because I just immediately think Denzel Washington, which this kid is nothing like. So
Yeah, obviously.
so yeah, so there's that, and they have, so all these people have this sickness called geostigma, and it's creating, and so they're also trying to like cure this illness then, which is being caused by Sephiroth in the life stream. So in terms of like plot, I mean, this movie is sort of just like another, I feel like the plot is a vehicle for Cloud and Sephiroth to fight again, wouldn't you say?
I would absolutely say that, and it's also loosely, it's more like it's very specifically a vehicle for Cloud and Sephiroth to fight at the end. But it also was just used as a vehicle to connect fight scenes within this movie. Like I'm pretty sure this movie was 75% fight scenes.
Which in my opinion was awesome.
Oh, so to me it was way too much. That it was endless fight scenes with very little context, and I wasn't given much reason to care about any of them. That, and this is just a personal gripe, the fight scene direction style where you don't hold a camera angle for more than 1.5 seconds and just constantly move the camera, shake it around in this frenetic action. I'm just not generally a fan of that. I would like to follow a nice choreographed scene, not have camera work make the need to not choreograph anything because there is no continuous fight of any kind going on.
See, it's so funny you say that because like I love. So basically, it feels like you were saying, like the last hour of this movie is just a fight scene, and
Yeah, 100%.
I was totally into it. Like I was just like, yes, this is awesome, and I enjoyed it. And it gets like, I mean, it pulls out every crazy. I mean, they're on motorcycles. There's like people shooting everything and swords, and
yeah,
it's like
you have
everything
your
you
Final Fantasy giant boss type creature, and then you have it all culminates in the Sephiroth fight, and if you're looking for bringing Final Fantasy battles to life, I think they did a good job of representing that. But they didn't do much else in the movie, which was to me not good.
So which I guess is like kind of goes to, so the question I have is that if you're making a movie for fans, like that is gonna just this is clearly directed to the Final Fantasy VII fan. Like, is it such a bad thing to really just kind of give them what they want? Like, let's just, I mean, because the fight with Cloud and Sephiroth was awesome.
Yeah, no, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing for at all. I just think it's not for me,
Mm-hmm.
like I didn't get much out of this because I just like I said I don't have this strong connection to Final Fantasy VII. I haven't played it in like 15-ish years, and I guess I didn't feel the need to ever see this come to life in this way. It's cool that it exists for the people that love it. You know, there's no problem with making a movie for a specific demographic. You know, everything doesn't need to be made for every single person. You know, if you want to indulge a fandom, I think that's fine. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It's not for me.
Well, that's, I guess, like kind of also, I think, in a way why I did want to watch this and talk about it was because I knew you were removed from Final Fantasy VII, and I knew it wasn't like your favorite. You know, you're not like this diehard Final Fantasy VII fan, because even we've talked about before is like with the remake. So you know, I've only played the demo of it, so I'm waiting to get it. I don't know. For me, it's like part of the, do I wait and see when the next iteration is going to come out before, you know, and I've got enough things to play that I'm not
Yeah.
jumping at it. But you lost interest in the remake pretty quick.
Yeah, I played it for, I don't know, maybe like 5 to 8 hours, something like that. Maybe up to 10, I can't quite remember. And it just like it didn't really interest me all that much, you know.
Which
I've never been a fan of the like pseudo action but kind of turn-based combat they do. I know, and again, this is things that like I just personally don't like. I know a lot of people thought the combat system was great, but to me, it's in between these two weird things that if you just picked one, that'd be better. So if you just like stick with the classic style, that's fine, or just go full action game where you're like full reign control and you're not interrupting your battle by pulling up menu prompts. Like I think one or the other is what I'd prefer, but it seemed to work well for a lot of people. So you know, like I take it's a personal preference.
But like with that, I mean, part of, I think, also the appeal of the remake is that it expands and it fleshes out the world of Final Fantasy VII, you know, and so who does that appeal to? It's probably the fans of Final Fantasy VII. If you really enjoyed the world that was created by the PlayStation, then you're going to probably really enjoy seeing that world created on a PlayStation 4 or 5. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think that was their goal, was to hit both audiences with that game. You know, do enough of that kind of thing to interest the old fans, but also make a quality enough game that you can bring a new generation into Final Fantasy VII. Like you have this great core base of a game. So just make it look nicer and make it play modern, and maybe you can get, you know, people 20 years younger are now can get interested in Final Fantasy.
I'm trying to think of like what is an example for us like that. I don't know if there's a good example. I'm trying to think of like a game where it was like, oh yeah, I played it, you know, this kind of like remade version of it way later, and then realized, oh yeah, there was this original, but I can't really think of one. I guess we're just not in that age.
I've never really run into that.
We're too old.
Yeah.
We're not at that point now where like people are, you know, I guess for us it was like back when like the GameCube, PlayStation 2, Xbox era, when they were just making everything into a 3D platformer that was once a 2D platforming franchise. Like,
Yeah.
you know, Pitfall Harry had a 3D game.
I did not know that.
Yeah, he did.
So
I
that
don't know
didn't work. I didn't get drawn into
who that
this
was for.
old franchise. Yeah.
I remember that because I did my AP US history final project on the history of board games and video games. Because I remember my teacher was like, "What are you interested in?" And I was like, "Well, I like video games." And I was like, "Well, how can I connect this to American history going further back?" So I connected board games to it, and I remember showing the comparison of the original Pitfall and Pitfall Harry on GameCube, PS2, Xbox. So that's why
Yeah.
that's why I know that. Fun fact. So, but anyway, back to Final Fantasy. So yeah, I think so. So I guess like yes, I totally agree with you. This movie is action sequences. I liked it. Not necessarily for you. I mean, yeah, I think in terms of a movie, this is pretty much just like a straight up Final Fantasy fan service. Like it's gonna hit you with the music. They do have like reimagined all of the songs. Like Aerith's theme at the end almost made me cry.
Yeah,
Like I got really into it.
All the music's there. All the familiar sounds are there. You know, a lot of you get to see the Omni Slash. You know, it's very much
There's
plays right into it.
a kid carrying a stuffed Moogle. It's
Yeah.
you know, all the little Easter eggs and all the things.
Cloud's
this
mopey
was
for a
some,
lot of the movie.
well, so it's interesting because I was talking to one of our friends about it, and he said that this was what created emo Cloud, and I was like, and when he said that, I thought, I guess, but also Cloud is kind of moody in
Yeah, unless he
the
specifically
original.
means by character design, that doesn't really make
Yeah,
sense to me because like Cloud is very, yeah, he's very
and
moody is the
even
right word in the
character design,
original
I wouldn't
game.
say that he's emo design. I mean, it's not, his hair is kind of what I would imagine if you were to make a 3D, slightly more realistic version of his crazy hair. He
Yeah,
looks a little less like Goku. I don't know. It's
yeah,
so I don't know. I guess that's a weird thing, but like, yeah, I don't know. I think he's always been a little bit moody, and his relationship with Tifa is, it's always kind of like this. She wants
one
him to,
sided.
in a way. I mean, in a way, but I think it's just like she wants him to kind of just be like, okay, like chill
Yeah,
and be with me, and he
and like,
can't for
you can
whatever
be
reason.
happy.
Yeah, you could stop running around and doing stuff. But um, I guess one of the questions that came up though from watching this is I wanted to get your thoughts and maybe just talk about it a little bit. Is the idea of video games being continued in a different medium? So the fact that you had Final Fantasy VII, and instead of making like a Final Fantasy VII 2, or some sort of continuation, yes, there are side games. Like I remember they made a game just based around Vincent, Dirge of Cerberus, which I heard was terrible.
Yeah, they had Dirge of Cerberus. They had Crisis Core, which I don't actually know
Crisis Core,
anything
yeah,
about that, but that I think is
yeah, I don't know much either.
I think that one's actually considered a good game.
Okay,
But
yeah,
I'm not really familiar with them. Um,
but
Sorry, go ahead.
but this idea of continuing a franchise, like whether it's video games or, and kind of what we talked about with the Resident Evil movies, how they were still seemingly canon. It seemed to
Yeah,
fit
like
within.
it didn't it did connect to the actual games a little bit, but for the most part had its own
Yeah,
standalone story. But it wasn't
but it,
trying to be a side story. It was trying to fit in with the the timeline of Resident Evil.
so I guess to make a more succinct question is, what do you think about video games being expanded into things like anime, where in order to get more of the story, you might have to watch either an animated movie, whether it's CG or like kind of more traditional animation. Like, I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
So I have like really mixed opinions on this because conceptually I think it's pretty awesome. Maybe you can express a story in a different way and you can get different things out of different mediums. So if you want to, you can really play around with characters, you can play around with concepts, you can play around with storytelling, and you can maybe do something a little different with it. And I think like at its best this is presented in something like Gungrave, which is considered, and granted this isn't a continuation per se, more an
Yeah.
expansion, but it was
Hmm.
generally considered a terrible game, but you have great character design and they turn that into an anime series which is dated at this point but quite good in my opinion. It has its
It was pretty
problems,
awesome when I watched it
but
back.
enjoyable. And so when you see stuff like that, I think it's very cool. And I think being able to explore a product or explore characters in a different way is very interesting. The problem it runs into, and I think you see that with this movie, with the Resident Evil movies, that the games are still the primary source, and so they
Hmm.
don't try to do anything too outside of, they're not trying to rewrite a story or kind of tell a world changing story within a movie or a comic book series or things like that. It's very constricted in what they do creatively because you can't mess with the world too much, especially if you're going to revisit that universe in a new game. You can't change all the things that happened or like start the story from a brand new point and
You could
change
create
the
some big
nature of the
gaps
world
there.
and create massive gaps between games for people who are mainly trying to play the games. So
Hmm.
when it actually manifests, I think it's underwhelming most times.
Hmm.
And I think you see that with this movie. We saw it with the Resident Evil movies. That they're not doing anything exciting. They're they're changing some faces and changing some characters and not even changing some faces with like, oh, let's just bring Cloud and Sephiroth back.
Yeah.
But and like with the Resident Evil, it's like, oh, this is a Resident Evil story with different villain names, but it's basically the same formula. And
Yeah.
that ends up being worse almost all the time because, the original format is how it was intended, and you basically try to translate that to a new media, whether it be a book or a movie or whatever, it just doesn't always play well.
I will say though, it's probably was interesting back in 2005 to be able to see those characters that way, and I'd be curious, you know, obviously can't do this because it's you need time travel. So, but to be someone in 2005 who really loved Final Fantasy VII and to be able to see those characters that way for the first time and to hear Sephiroth, like, I mean, Sephiroth sounds awesome as in and
Yeah, and
in his
yeah, and I can see
Japanese voice too,
yeah,
especially. He just sounds like the total badass villain that you would want him to be.
yeah,
It's
and
awesome.
they did great in casting that, and that's the good part of it. That's what I'm talking about when you can see it from a different perspective. What I'm talking about being limited is the storytelling, the writing.
Yeah, because it
it's
was
very,
this very
underwhelming almost all the time when you introduce a especially a well established piece of media that's a video game and try to make it into a movie. You just seem to be very hindered in what you can write.
yeah, and that's where you get like this sort of bare bones story of the geostigma being kind of your premise, and basically, oh, Sephiroth's still he's in the live stream, and and then you still get Aerith coming back and the whole thing, and it's just like it sort of is almost just like the game being retold it again in a different
Yeah.
but look how cool it looks because
Yeah, it's
and
like
yeah,
you
I
could have
guess that
added
it's
five hours onto the end of the video game, and this would have been it, and it would have felt right in place. Which is,
yeah,
I guess, in a way that has value, maybe. But to me, I would more prefer if they had a chance to kind of play with the universe a little bit and explore it in
yeah.
the new media. But like, they're not. That's counterproductive to what their goals are, I think.
Yeah, you give people what they want. They want to see Cloud and Sephiroth fight with awesome CG battles, because you could potentially make a side story about Barrett or something like that. But is that really what people want? You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I so I get why they end up being what they are, but again, I said it quite a few times on this one because it's how I feel about all this. Is it's just not for me. I don't think anything is inherently bad about any of this. I just think it's not what I'm interested in.
It's kind of made me think about how Disney is with Star Wars right now, in the sense that they did the trilogy of movies, and then it's a lot of the offshoot stuff is for like the hardcore fans. So for me, The Mandalorian was a dream come true as a huge Boba Fett fan, and I won't say anything else, but that was the thing I've been more interested in than anything else, was this sort of ability to expand upon somewhat of a character that I liked from the original trilogy, or at least some of the lore that came with it. So, for me, the new trilogy of movies, I mean, I'm a huge Star Wars fan. I, growing up as a kid, loved the original trilogy, still do, but I've only seen the first movie of the new ones. I just didn't care after a bit because but they hooked me on that, oh, this character or this narrative, I want to see what they can do with this piece. So I guess you'd have to be, a huge Tifa fan or something to really want to see ins and outs.
To see a Tifa spinoff where you just
Which I'd watch that.
watch her
I love Tifa.
running the bar, basically.
Yeah, just Tifa's it's like Bar Rescue, but with like Tifa.
Yeah.
Just watch her like daily talking to sad customers or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yuffie just stealing things. I don't know. That might be a fun one too. But yeah, I guess going back to what we were talking about though, I know what you mean, where they serve a purpose only to expand upon sort of the things that are exciting and important to the fan base, and they don't really expand. I guess that is something I would be interested in seeing, or trying to think or find an example of it, of something that really takes a video game or something, for example, and then just says, we're gonna create this whole new thing in a different medium that is a like that is part
Yeah,
of this, but you really have to be
but it really
invested in
expands the
both.
narrative.
Yeah, and I can't off the top of my head think of it. I'm sure there are things out there that do that, but
Yeah, I wish I would have known you'd ask this because I know I've come across some examples, and I think it often ends up being like anime continued in manga, or I think Portal had a lot of comic book adaptations. Maybe it was just one, maybe I'm misremembering, but that do actually
mhm.
like give you actual backstory, where Portal is kind of an ambiguous story in
But
terms of
even
like the events are very clear, but like how you got there and what happens next or not.
But even the idea of like anime and then the manga continues is, I feel, more of a symptom of the anime was popular or not, and so we keep it going or not. The manga will continue if it's
Oh,
running
so
concurrently.
I'm not
So
talking about like specifically common, the manga exists, an anime gets made and gets canceled. I'm talking about
okay,
like an anime exists and they start writing a unique anime is made, and then they start writing a manga
gotcha.
after the anime doesn't make it but the manga keeps going.
I see.
But
So
that's
it's
also
not
like
something that
there's definitely an argument there to be made that like because that transition is made so frequently that like anime and manga are, while definitely different things,
mhm.
they cross over so much in presentation that it might not
It's
actually
not
be
really
that
making much of
different.
a leap.
Yeah. Like the
Yeah,
stylistic leap is not much different.
yeah. So I guess I guess that, I don't. Do you have any other thoughts or questions, or just make you think about anything in terms of this sort of crossover?
No, not really. I just want to point out at the end of the movie,
Hmm.
I was very like struck and surprised that they just went full Cloud as Jesus mode in the story. I don't know if you caught that, but
I'm trying to think
they
back. I don't think
resurrected
I
him
remember
and then he started baptizing the kids.
Oh, oh my God! Yeah. Well, because yeah, he did,
I
they
just
did
thought
have
that was
that.
kind of out of left field.
It was a little weird. I remember watching it, and being like, where it's just like, "Come on, everybody!" and like everyone just hops in the water, and they're just like straight up. I mean, it was a callback to earlier when they did the bad guys,
I
um,
I
got
know,
everyone,
but
but
the watching that moment, that's the first thing that came to mind is like that they they resurrect him and he grabs a kid and starts pouring water over him, and then the kid is healed. And I'm just like, oh,
hey,
this is
man.
like straight up some Jesus imagery.
Well, some people might worship Cloud
Yeah,
like they would worship Jesus. I don't know.
but
Yeah, I forgot it.
that was the only
That is
moment
funny.
of the whole movie that I just like I got a good laugh out of.
Yeah, there's some goofy moments. I mean, I thought like I said, the humor with the Turks. Again, you don't really remember the Turks even as characters in the game, but so it's maybe a little different. But I thought like some of the stuff they did was funny. Like, I don't know, there's the part where they're flying the helicopter and all sorts of goofy stuff happens. But I enjoyed that sort of comedy of it. And but yeah, that was a goofy, weird kind of
Yeah,
just all right, and that's the end. So, um, yeah, I guess then. So for me, just to this wasn't necessarily to be a movie review per se. I think it was sort of, I think we both wanted to just kind of talk about another
yeah,
video game movie crossover and
yeah. Just
what
talk
it
about
does
the
for that,
intersection of video games and movies because it does happen a
and
decent
yeah,
amount.
anime or whatever.
Yeah.
So yeah, I to kind of put a stamp on it, I guess to end things. I would say if you are a fan of Final Fantasy VII, you should definitely watch this. And I really enjoyed it. I thought it was fun. It's a fun movie. I think that is the thing that I will say is great about it is it's fun. And if you're going to go for any type of continuation or spin-off of something, it's got to be fun because there's nothing worse than when you watch. I mean, I even think about just as examples of like a lot of anime when they get their spin-off movies, right? It's like, okay, you got the series and then like here's this movie they add on at the end. There's something like Cowboy Bebop the movie, which I think is like the prime example of the way to do it. That's the best, in my opinion, one of the best ways to, if you're going to do a movie spin-off of an anime series, that's the way to do it.
Yeah, and I'd agree with that. And like you said, it's fun throughout and a good representation. I think Cowboy Bebop had a leg up because of how the show's designed. It was much
True.
more. It was more
It
like a long
lends itself to
episode.
that.
It lends itself well to telling a standalone story, which a lot of
Mm-hmm.
anime does not.
Yeah.
Um,
But like, so an example that jumps out to me that I was disappointed with was, Trigun after years of being away. And I love Trigun, and I know we both have different opinions on it still, and maybe we'll talk about that one day. But,
yeah,
um, but, uh,
but we can both agree that Badlands Rumble was very, very disappointing.
yes, exactly. And like, that's the way to not do it. And so, and it just didn't feel even that fun. And I've tried to watch it a few times, and it just seems like each time I'm just like, okay. And I like, kind of just lose interest. So what I give credit to Final Fantasy VII Advent Children doing was it was fun. I was engaged the whole time. And because I cared about the characters, because I care about the lore of Final Fantasy VII, it really held my attention. And it was, again, you know, what felt like an hour-long action sequence uninterrupted, basically.
Well, and
But it was, I
it's
think,
not
well
just
done and awesome.
it's not just felt like, because I
No, I
watched
mean,
the
I think it
movies
was.
in two sittings, and I stopped at about an
Oh, yeah?
hour, and when I came back, the entire rest of the movie was that end fight sequence. Like,
Yeah.
I didn't realize
So,
I had already watched all the plot of the movie. Like,
yeah, it's like plot, hour-long fight sequence, baptism, and
yep.
it's the movie.
And then movie over.
So, yeah, I say it's just if you're looking for if you're a fan of Final Fantasy VII, you probably have already seen it. So I feel like this is almost like recommend, like no
Yeah,
shit.
I don't
Like,
even think you need to throw a stamp of recommendation out there.
yeah, but I will say for maybe people who are new to it, like myself, I was new to being able to play Final Fantasy VII for the first time, and there might be younger people out there who are new to it and experiencing all of it for the first time. I'd say it's a worthwhile view. So, and Brandon, I guess you'd say, in conclusion,
It just,
it's
yeah,
not for you.
if you want to watch it, watch it. Like, if you like Final
Yeah.
Fantasy VII, watch it. I'm sure you'll
Yeah.
enjoy it. If you,
But if you
for
don't-
any reason, have never played a Final Fantasy game and thought I should watch this movie, don't. Absolutely don't.
Yeah, you'll be lost.
Yeah,
and
you'll
confused.
be lost the whole time.
But it'll be interesting to see with Sephiroth now being in Smash if there's even more of a little bump and revival. I mean, you had the remake, you got Sephiroth. In
I don't,
Smash,
think Sephiroth in Smash is going to move the needle any more than it already has been with the new one coming out.
Remember, Marth and Roy sparked all of the interest in Fire Emblem in the West.
Yeah, but
when they
Fire
were
Emblem
included
was
in Melee.
non-existent in the West. Like,
I know.
people didn't know what Fire Emblem was. It's a different situation.
I know. Isn't it crazy to think back, like, that there was a time when you could look at those things? I remember it. We were playing Melee, and just, who are these guys? They're from this other game series. Just,
Yeah.
or even I remember in 64 for us, Samus was like, who's Samus?
Yeah, we had no idea who Samus was at that time.
Because callback to earlier in the
'Cause we missed
conversation,
out on
neither of
Super
us had
Metroid.
played Super Metroid. See, I had to tie it back. So, all right. Well, I think that's gonna do it for us. I think if anything else, so I think that was it's fun to just talk about video games, anime. Again, we'll be doing more of this stuff. I think we have other ideas and topics. So, anything you want to say before I send us off?
No, I think that's it. All
right.
thoughts are
Well,
out.
thank you for joining us. Check us out on YouTube, Wooster Stream. Check out any of our other anime podcast episodes, I should say, anime podcast episodes. And yeah, we'll catch you next time.
Well, we'll see you.